other allies who are just yelling and screaming, there's no purpose, to what they're doing. When in fact what they're doing is they're trying to very loudly, because Indigenous people are so silenced in the prevailing historical narratives in a place like New Mexico, is they're trying to tell a history through protest, because protest makes history just as much as anything else. They're trying to tell a history of conquest and trying to bring that truth out so that we can deal with it. Right? So that we can deal with it in a very honest way in public together. And so that's been the campaign of the Diné Pueblo Youth Alliance. And what these women are showing us, they've definitely shown this to me, is what happens when we reenact and we reforge and we remember the bonds that we have through relationality, through history together, right? And even though there are many people who would like for us to be divided, who would like for us to blame each other for not always getting things right. That protest was not exactly right, but nevertheless, we all come together and we share a common history, and our common history, right, is it's that from a Diné perspective, it's that relationality. And it's a common history that has a common enemy, and our common enemy is colonialism. And so if we understand relationality in that way, if we understand history in that way, then for me, what tribal history means, and my job as a tribal historian, is to always reinforce that relationality, is to always remember and to remind myself and those others that we actually have relationships with each other that are not just about us establishing, laughing together, which is important, right, eating food together, but that is the basis of a political alliance that can strengthen us together to fight what we call the monsters of colonialism. Because what was also attached to that Entrada protest was the work that the Diné Pueblo Youth Alliance is doing on protecting Chaco Canyon, right, which is one of the biggest issues right now in this region, is protecting Chaco Canyon, which is incredibly sacred to both Diné and Pueblo peoples from hydraulic fracking. And there are already many wells that are there. It's devastating families locally, right? And so abolishing the Entrada is as much about trying to tell history and allow the public to debate history when we're told that we're supposed to receive it as an axiomatic thing, right, as a truth, that this was actually about bloodless reconquest. But it's also about bringing us together and reforging those bonds of relationality. And so I just want to close, because I think I'm out of time, to come back to LaDonna and Nick and Jennifer Dunnett-Dale, who trained me as a tribal historian, that Standing Rock, even though Standing Rock isn't exceptional, but it is at the same time. And I think a lot of us who were involved, we're about 6 months out from the end of that particular flashpoint, that uprising. I think in this long movement for Indigenous liberation that a lot of us are really striving for and working on, that what Standing Rock really represents, and how I've been thinking about it, is this remarkable coming together of Indigenous nations, right? There were like over 300 Indigenous nations who staked their flags up there. And I remember when I saw that, in August of 2016, I immediately was like, oh my gosh, this is like something historical is happening. Could you feel it? I could feel it. I could feel what was happening. And what was happening were Indigenous people coming together and remaking political bonds and remaking what I call ke, or relationality together. And even though that uprising didn't stop oil from flowing through the Dakota Access Pipeline, it did actually reforge these relationships and these alliances that we have always had with each other against a common enemy, right? The common enemy is resource extraction and how it ravages our communities, and the common enemy for me is colonialism. And so I just want to leave you with that today, that this is my perspective on tribal history, that tribal historians are always moving towards and always reminding ourselves and others how to be good relatives. And that to be a good relative means to work together against, if we identify a common enemy, to work together, to work against division, right? In the way that we're trying to combat these monsters that are really devastating our communities. And so that's my perspective of tribal history. It's something that's always living, it's alive, because relationships aren't linear. They're things that we do, and we will always do. And if we always engage in those relationships together, we will always exist. as the peoples, the first peoples of this land, in the homelands that we hold so dear, that our languages speak to, the specific places that are sacred and holy to us. And so that's all I would like to say tonight. Yeah.